everyone, and welcome to a very special webinar from the team at Plan Tracker. Joining me once again here today is our founder and managing director, Elisa James. And Elisa, today we're going to be talking about the brand new price guide. So we're looking at our new 2020 to 2021 price guide. What are you excited about sharing with us today, just while we let everyone log in and get themselves settled and ready to go?
Oh, Mel, I have to say, I mean, look, you know, at Plan Tracker, we are pretty much all price guide nerds. And we actually do run regular competitions around knowing your item codes and other price guide crazy questions. So it's always a bit of fun. But look, I think this price guide is interesting for a whole range of reasons. There's some pretty key changes in there that signal some directions the agency's taking. And there's a few little interesting tweaks along the way that we're going to talk about.
Fantastic. And look, we definitely do have a lot of fun at the Plan Tracker office. We like to play a fun thing called Cahoots. And we're actually thinking, if you'd like to join us next week, we're going to have a live game of Cahoots with a pretty special prize at the end. So stay tuned.
Should I give everybody a sneak peek, just in case? So for those other price guide nerds out there, if you are the winner of our Cahoots competition on the price guide next week, this is coming your way. It's a prize that is beyond prizes. There's no other words, really. All right, Mel, let's jump in.
Fantastic. All right, well, we will jump right into content now. I'm just going to pop the slides up on the screen for everyone, so just give me one moment to do that. Let us jump straight on in and we'll jump right into these. So if you've just joined us, we are today looking at the new 2020 to 2021 NDIS price guide. It is July 1st, so this guide is live as of today. We're joined by Elisa James, the founder and managing director of Plan Tracker, and we're going to jump straight on in. So if you're joining a bit late, you will catch up in the replay session. But Elisa, do you want to run us through a quick overview of what we're covering today?
Okay, so one nice thing this year meant that the price guide came out a little bit early. So it wasn't just launched on the day of going live or a couple of days before. We've had it for a week or so to look through, which has been great. And of those, these are the things that we think for today are probably our top hits to run past and run through with you. We're going to go through some basics, talk about some changes that we think are possibly coming through down the track. We're going to talk a little bit in that around the annual price review. We're going to talk about some changes to just a couple of key areas of quotable supports, programs of supports, which is a new initiative that's come into the price guide. Okay, I've got to admit it. My least favorite topic is travel and transport. It's got to be number one, hands down. But it's really important that we know it well so that we can help make that an easy thing for everybody else. So we will cover that off. A quick overview of some SIL changes that supported independent living. Some new employment supports into core, which is pretty exciting. I'm pretty pumped about that one. And some significant changes to groups and what and how the NDIS has walked back on that in the last probably 3 days, and what that means for any group providers, whether you are a therapist provider or a social community participation provider, or even an exercise physiologist running groups. So here we go. Mel, back
Fantastic.
to you.
Just a little bit of quick housekeeping, and Elisa, you're getting some feedback in the chat box already that we all happen to love our most favourite topic, which is transport. So we are going to get there for everyone. If this is your first time joining us, or if you have joined us previously, just a quick refresher. If you'd like to ask any questions, you can do so in the chat box or in the Q&A. We do have Louise and Justine from the Plan Tracker team joining us today. They'll be helping to moderate in the chat box. We may throw some of those questions, if we have time, into the presentation as we go along. But as Elisa has just told everyone, we've got a lot to get through. So Elisa, I think without further ado, let's jump straight on in and let's look at some downloading surprises. So I know a lot of us downloaded the price guide when we saw the interim. Where we did our last session, we talked about the fact that there hadn't been any pricing changes, which was expected. So we have seen some new ones. Big question on everyone's mind to start with is the new CSV format. So if you're a provider or a very interested participant and you've downloaded the new price guide as a CSV, what's going on with that format, please?
So the price catalogue, I think it's actually called, isn't it? The Excel spreadsheet, and the price guide is the more lots of words to tell us about what's in the list. you'll notice, again, price guide nerds out there may already have noticed that we've lost a few columns. There were a few columns to the right of each price line that would tell you things like, can travel be claimed on this item? Is their NDIA reporting required? And can we charge for non-face-to-face? There was also a COVID column, which of course is no longer relevant. I guess the big thing is that the agency has tried to simplify the price guide, which is always a good goal and a good agenda. But it does mean that all of those things have pretty much then been placed. So travel, non-face-to-face, a lot of those things that used to be ticked are now actually a standard for most items. So there was no need to kind of continue with the columns.
Fantastic. And you definitely were correct in correcting me there. It is the support catalogue that we're referring to in that format. So thank you for that.
I told you we like detail.
I was going to say, the thing that's definitely on the front of my mind is that lovely nerd hat that we like to wear when it comes to the price guide. So with that in mind, I believe you found a few changes since the initial, I think it was the 24th of June.
Yeah.
That we all started downloading the initial one, but there's been some changes already.
There have. There's been a couple of changes. We're going to talk about the big one, the groups change. That's probably the biggest change in wording that happened between the version of the price guide that was brought out on the 24th and the version that we saw on the 29th. There hasn't been, or as of a few hours ago, there hadn't been a further update. We do keep an eye on these things. But the other change, other than groups being walked back, which we'll talk about, was a really interesting change in wording around the word telehealth. We've gone from teleservice in the first version of the price guide to calling it telehealth, which I know a lot of participants have really benefited and enjoyed the fact that they haven't had to pass up on therapy and other supports during this COVID season. And it's been a space where the agency has responded well in terms of helping people get access to devices and other things to do telehealth or teletherapy, teleservice. So I find it really interesting that we're still probably, I would expect this word will probably change again. It's an interesting space. We've always talked about, or had the NDIS talk about, that health is a separate area to disability and that NDIS funding doesn't cover health supports. But of course, we know now that that has changed slightly with over the last 18 months, health supports coming in. So we've now got the word telehealth to describe any virtual connection.
Fantastic. And I'm definitely with you there. I'm sure we'll see some abridged versions of whatever they want that word to be as we move forward. Now, the other thing everyone will note if you are looking at the slides on your screen right now is we're actually expecting a new price guide on October 1st. So Elisa, do you want to tell us a little bit about why that's going to happen when it's already July 1st? That's only a few months away.
That's right. Now, look, in theory, it would be great to get one new price guide on the 1st of July. But and not another one for another year. But what tends to happen, and there's already some clues here in this price guide and in some wording, is that there are a lot of things a lot of areas that have been in the price guide recently have come in, usually due to COVID. So support coordination in core, for example, would be a great example there. A number of areas that the agency has very clearly said are being reviewed and will, the date of 30 September is kind of that final date for some of those things. We don't know if which way the review will go, whether some of those things will stay in. For example, being able to purchase low-cost, low-risk assistive technology out of your CB daily activities or your therapy budget, which is a really handy one for especially under sevens who don't often have core and consumables. So we don't know what will happen there, but what we do know is that there's lots of indicators that this price guide will be in place until basically 1st of October and replaced by an update with some tweaks at that point.
Fantastic. All right. And now I do have another question for you, and I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit here. Reasonable and necessary. When the NDIS first came out, there was a lot of talk about this terminology, and what is reasonable and necessary. we saw it kind of dip in and out for a few years there. Something that Justine actually picked up in the price guide was that we've come back to that mention of reasonable and necessary, but it's in regards to providers this time. So we've got, I'm just going to read a little quote here from the price guide that we picked up, which is providers should not claim for supports from a participant's plan where the support is not in line with the participant's goals, objectives, and aspirations as set out in their plan, and where the support is not reasonable and necessary. So is the onus back on providers now to decide what's reasonable and necessary?
Look, it's an interesting inclusion. I think it will be a little bit of a watch and see. Really providers are not in a position to make that call. If we talk about true choice and control, then that's really a participant's call. We've always, and the agency has been quite clear on this, that reasonable and necessary is under the Act is something that's put in place and is determined by the planner who has delegated authority from the agency to make those decisions. So it's interesting that that wording has snuck in. I think we'll see where that sits. But look, really, providers don't have the knowledge or the delegated authority to decide reasonable and necessary. So for now, let's just leave that one and see what happens, I think.
I think it's one of those many spaces where we'll say, watch this space, and we'll keep you updated on whether that stays in, goes out. If there's more clarification, we'll just see how we go.
But of course, always on that, our position and for Plan Tracker would be very clear around that. It's about choice and control by the participant. So, once that plan is set, then it's provided that the participant meets those, the support is a disability support and meets those guidelines that the agency provides so clearly and easily through Participant Guidebook 3, then really that's the sort of decisions that that participants could be and should be making.
Fantastic. All right. Next up, I want to jump into some basics. So we're going to look at some of, I suppose, what you like to call the basic changes, things including COVID loading, our lovely favourite topic of many weeks and many sessions on these webinars. So we might actually start there. What has changed with COVID loading as of today? So we're July 1st. Does it still apply?
So COVID loading was dropped as of the end of June. So that 10% that was brought in to assist providers to be able to kind of manage through the COVID time and just provide an extra bit of funding throughout that season, that has finished. In the initial price guide that came out, it was still shown at the COVID loading prices and then very quickly changed back to the pre-COVID prices. Before, of course, coming out again with the CPI increases. So what you'll see now is not a decrease in pricing, but you will see that those original prices that we had from July 1 last year have been increased generally across the board by CPI.
Fantastic. And another COVID question we get a lot, I know we have spoken about this recently in regards to some wording changes. Support coordination. Can I still access a support coordinator using my core support funding? Or has that kind of been taken out? Because I know there was some wording where you could only do it if your LAC or your local area coordinator was unable to assist. What's kind of happening in that space?
Look, it's pretty much as it was. So CORE has, as we know, it was a COVID strategy to bring in support coordination into CORE. And then there was a bit of a walk back on some of the wording around that, in that you had to first, before you're using it, check in with your LAC or your early years provider for assistance, and then and only if you couldn't get it, then to move on and use your support coordinator. It's still pretty much in there in that state. So at this point, the great thing I think is that support coordination is still in CORE. I know there's a lot of lobbying going on to try and keep that there. Just on funding flexibility, for those who are media followers and followers of ministerial announcements, back in February, our Disability Minister, Mr. Robert, of course, made an announcement about fungibility or flexibility across budgets and making it easier for funding to be used flexibly. Unfortunately, we haven't seen that come through at this stage. We were pretty much, these were the dates he was talking about. I think that's probably not so much to do with the desire not to have flexibility, but more about some of the restraints or constraints, if you like, of the NDIS business system that doesn't cope very well with some of those sort of more flexible changes.
Fantastic. And I know there were a lot of us in the community who were waiting to see if, as Elisa kindly calls it there, the fungibility, so that is funding flexibility. It's just a nice hybrid word that was invented, and we're going to roll with that. We haven't seen it yet. So thank you for clarifying that, Elisa, because I know a lot of us were hanging out to see, was that included? Was it not? Did we just miss it somewhere? I think that's really, really important.
It's not there yet. Let's hope it doesn't fall off the agenda.
Yeah, I'd love to see it on there myself, and I'm sure a lot of our community members definitely would. So yeah, we will wait and see, and we'll keep you informed as always. The next topic I wanted to have a chat to you about is establishment fees. So we did briefly kind of run through this in our last couple of questions session. Do you want to just run us through top level again? What's going on with establishment fees? Who can charge them? How
So
often can I charge?
establishment fees are a part of core. And the idea is that it's an opportunity where if you are a provider of core supports, so assistance with daily life or social and community participation, which has a fabulous new name change, then what happens is that you would, if provided you were engaging with a new participant and you have signed a service agreement for a minimum of 20 hours per month, and for a minimum of the next 3 consecutive months, then you were able to charge an establishment fee, because that's an acknowledgement of that extra time it takes to set up with a new participant who you've never worked with before, to understand their care needs and their support needs, and to cover, just really enable that process to go well. So that has become a lot more flexible. Previously, it was kind of locked down to kind of whichever provider got in first, which made it difficult, if the person wanted to change providers throughout the year. Now it's a one time per participant per provider. So if you are a provider and you are meeting a participant, then you have one opportunity, not per plan, but per that relationship forever, to use that establishment fee time. So.
Fantastic. I think that's really good clarity there, because we get that question a lot as to, is it per provider, per plan? So thank you so much for clarifying that. The other thing that was very exciting for us to see added, if you like, to the new price guide, or support catalogue rather, I'll get that term eventually, is psychosocial recovery coaches. So do you want to run us through a little bit about what exactly is a psychosocial recovery coach and what's their purpose?
Yeah, I've got to admit, I'm kind of only semi excited about this one, and I guess my concern is really about, will there be any providers who want to provide this service at the rates that are included in the current price guide? So it sits in under the 07 support coordination budget, and it's basically coaches designed. It's almost a hybrid between some support coordination and direct support work and direct support. So it's a coaching type role. There's a lot of requirement for workers. So workers do have to have a minimum level of training around mental health and a level of experience as well. So, which is a good thing. I'm just not sure that the pricing really reflects the work required in that space. And certainly a number of providers I've spoken to this week, and one of my key questions has been, will you guys be providing this? I haven't had any yeses yet. So I think it's very needed. I think it could be a really great service, just not sure it's pitched at the right space at this point.
Yeah, definitely. It'll be exciting to see if any providers do pick that up, or if there are changes to respond to that need, if it needs to go somewhere else or the rates need to change. Yeah, I think it's really great. And thank you for the insight there. It's nice to have that personal opinion level of, is it a good thing? Is it positioned right? I think it's really good, because that's part of the community feedback in this whole process. Next up, I want to jump on to something that has been on my mind for a little while, which is the annual pricing review. So we've been through one of these reviews pretty much every year, but I believe the rumour mill has it that this is the last year that we're going to have this formalised annual pricing review. So what's likely to happen moving forward?
So first up, full caveat, this is purely our interpretation of the system based or situation based on a number of different conversations. We haven't read it in writing, hasn't been stated by the agency, all things subject to change, but just throwing it out there that it does look like this annual process of doing a price review where there's been some significant shuffles of pricing, rather than just a straight CPI indexation is probably we've done our last year on that. We could be wrong, that's just our guess. But what that means is that next year there probably won't be such a working groups process as gone on this year, and a full write-up and recommendations for major price changes. It's probably going to sit about where things are plus CPI. What that means is that we're kind of moving into that slightly, we could hardly say that the scheme is matured by any stretch yet. You know, there are still people coming onto the scheme for the first time. We're still in that space. But, you know, what we are seeing is that things are becoming a little bit more stable. As we go forward, what's likely to happen is markets will become less thin. And as that happens and there's more providers and there's a better equilibrium, we're likely to see hopefully some of those price caps come off and let market forces be at play. Of course, we know that's unlikely to be in remote and very remote and in other thin type markets or very controlled spaces. But ideally, we're kind of moving in that direction.
Fantastic. And just for clarity for anyone who is new to NDIS or hasn't heard the term before, what generally is a CPI indexation?
So what happens there is that CPI is our consumer price index. So it's an indicator that we use it nationwide across many, many sectors to say, hey, the cost of living is increasing. It costs you a bit more for milk, a bit more for bread, that kind of thing. And so what the NDIS does is on 1 July is basically apply a basic CPI rate. You know, it's slight. We've noticed that there's a couple of slight differences across some of the numbers, but I know for plan management, because obviously that's the space that we're, you know, most closely track, it's 2.2% increase, so kind of in line with CPI. Now, what does that mean for participants? It means that participant plans will also be increased. So the budgets in each plan will also go up by CPI. So from a practical point of view, that's been you know, for want of a better saying, a little bit of a dog's breakfast over the last couple of years. Previously, the agency used to just go through on the 11th, well, this year it will be on the 11th of July, but they would go through just after the price guide is released and attempt to show the increase in everybody's service bookings, which is where, for those who may not know, it's where you secure funding on the portal, ready to be drawn down as you need to claim against it. In the last couple of times, it's actually fallen. So for plan managers, if your plan is plan managed, it's fallen on the shoulders of the plan manager to have to go in, and unfortunately, because we're still getting there with APIs, the wonderful computer-to-computer connections that will make life easier. And so it's fallen to plan managers to have to go in and manually update each of those. So the money is there. They just have to go in, open, edit the booking, apply the extra, and save the change. Self-managers, it will just be available for you. That's straightforward. Agency people, if you're an agency registered provider and you're providing services, you simply talk to your customer, work out if you need to increase your service booking, and away you go.
Fantastic.
So 11th of July is the date.
That's a good date to pop in the calendar. And just for anyone who is self-managing, obviously you will see it in your budgets. If you're using another platform, a spreadsheet, an application, you can
Plan Tracker self-management app.
That
shameless
I was
plug.
going to say it. Shameless plug there. If you are using any of those, just make sure you update to match your new portal totals for each of your budget items so that you are tracking correctly. You know how much funding you've spent and how much remains. Elisa, next, I'd love to jump onto a hot topic of, I want to say the week, but I'm going to say weeks because we've known it's been coming. Quotable supports. So we've seen some changes in this and we've had a lot of questions, and there's a big one that I want to go through. But what's really going on here? So we've seen that shift from they now must be included in your plan. What exactly does that change mean?
Okay, so let's give some practical examples. So 2 areas that come up for participants pretty regularly are meal preparation and delivery and linen. So these are 2 areas that have always been in the price guide as a quotable support, but for whatever reason, they were quite easily claimed against. So certainly for plan managers, it would be, you know, the majority of times if somebody came and presented an invoice for meal prep, you'd simply put in a claim and the claim would be paid. So but not all the time, because then you'd go back and you'd have to go and say, well, actually, it is a quotable item. You'll need to get a quote done, present it to the agency, which often then meant a redoing of the plan, and so was quite painful. So it was a really mixed bag and quite a bit of an admin nightmare. There's clarity around that these now must be in your plan as stated items. So if you are a participant wanting to make sure your next plan has meal preparation and delivery, or linen, or any other type quotable type item, actually driving lessons falls into that one as well, then just make sure that you've done your legwork before your plan review so that you can request that to be in your plan. Otherwise, if you come back later, and certainly with your plan manager, or if you're trying to find an agency provider to help you with that, it's going to be tricky.
Fantastic. All right. Now we've got a question from Michelle. And Michelle, thank you so much for reaching out. I did hold this one up for a little while because I wanted to ask Elisa while we're live on this session for you. Elisa, can we have some clarity around participants who currently are receiving meal prep and delivery within their current plan? Do they have to have a plan review to now have this included if it's not stated?
Mel, that's a really good question. And I think the reality is obviously if you're self-managed, that's, you claim at the category level, so much less of an issue because you are not subject to price guide restrictions and processes in a lot of ways. And I think actually that's right. But for our plan managed customers, it's a little bit of wait and see at the moment. We're hoping that there's not going to be any hiccups, but let's just see how it goes.
Fantastic. All right. With the idea of hiccups in mind, something we always love to talk about at Plan Tracker is innovative supports, and how can we innovate the way that we think about accessing supports and services. So if there does happen to be an impact, which we will wait and see, how else can we access that meal prep and delivery if we don't have it stated in our plan? Are there any other ideas that you can suggest?
It's a really good question, Mel. And I think it's really important that, your NDIS funding is there to help you. It's there to help you bridge that gap. And so sometimes going for a plan review, waiting for the wheels of process to happen, just isn't feasible or isn't necessarily the best solution. So, think innovatively. Think about what other supports you have in place that you could use. For example, could you use a support worker to help you come in and do some of that meal preparation or help with laundry? Could you use a domestic assistant to come in and help with some of that? Where, obviously where it's a genuine disability support and it's bridging that gap for you, then it might be that, you might not be able to order from Light and Easy at this point while you're waiting in process, or from other, great providers like Canella. But just think about the other ways to get it to achieve your goal.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that. With the interest of time, we're going to move on to our next topic here. And this has been a big one for us. Programs of support. So, Elisa, do you want to give us a brief overview? What exactly is a program of support?
So, one of the really challenging spaces that I know a lot of providers, and they've spoken to us about it quite regularly, find is the real challenge with this move to individualised funding that the NDIS offers in the area of groups. And this is really we're going to talk about some other group changes later, but this program of support hasn't been something that's been in the price guide before. We've had groups before and ratios of 1 to 2, 1 to 5, that type of thing for support or for therapy or whatever it is you're doing, or group pricing. But there's a new area being added to the price guide, and it talks about a program of support. The idea is that if you're wanting to run some sort of group that lasts for up to 12 weeks, that you'll be able to book people in at the beginning. Of course, the risk is always that if somebody pulls out in the middle of the group, it becomes unviable for you. And so there is a longer cancellation period than there is on standard supports. Standard support cancellation fees are, 2 days at the moment. They've gone back to 2 days. But here you can charge up to a 2-week time frame. So if they're not going to attend and they've said they're exiting, you can charge for the next 2 weeks. So not obviously for the length of the whole program that's remaining, but for up to 2 weeks. So it's a block of sessions, maximum of 12. Again, like all supports for the NDIS, except some home mods by prior agreement, there's no pre-claiming. So you do need to wait until after the service is delivered until you invoice for that and claim for that. Again, we would always encourage providers, if you're concerned about waiting, just to invoice halfway through or at the end of each session. You know, that's always a good way to go too if you're worried about cash flow type issues. And you must have a service agreement. Just pop that one in there. It's one of the requirements of this. So even if you don't regularly use service agreements, for this one, you'll need one.
Definitely important note there, and thank you for checking that on the end. Something I just want to clarify for anyone who may not understand the terminology of pre-claiming, it means that you cannot pay in advance for a support or service. So we can't pay in advance for a course or a program of supports, just for clarity over terminology, because I know sometimes we get that asked in a different way. So thank you so much for that, Elisa, and I think it's really good to have that overview of what exactly is included, what's not, what I can and can't do. It's really important for providers as well. And as Elisa mentioned, if it is a cash flow thing for you and it makes it easier, it might be a few minutes extra admin to invoice more regularly, but it means you'll get paid in the more regular installments. So can make it a bit more comfortable for a lot of providers. All right, Elisa, we've got our favorite topic coming up next. I dare say I want to call it our dear old friend. So I think, as always, let's start with some clarification here. We talk about transport, we talk about travel. So what is the difference between participant transport and provider travel?
All right, so let's define it first up. And I have to say, a big hello and very sorry to all our friends in the 10 Melbourne postcodes who are not doing any travel or transport right now. And thank you for staying home and helping Melbourne to overcome the COVID challenge, which is there. But yes, transport and travel. So we think about these things in kind of two ways. So provider travel, I'm going to use the therapist example, but the new price guide has meant that travel is now chargeable or billable across actually a whole range of supports. We saw before the column has been taken out to mark which ones are and aren't, and pretty much it's across most things. So provider travel is the cost if you as a provider are traveling to see and provide a support for a participant. The time that you spend in the car getting to see them is provider travel. You can now, there's been no change to the amount of time you can bill. So metro areas, 30 minutes, remote and very remote, up to an hour. The difference now, and the good thing in the price guide, is there's an acknowledgement that it's not just about the cost of your time, but there's also some non-labor costs that can be billed. So mileage or kilometres, that 85 cents a kilometre kind of rate, parking fees, road tolls, NDIA funding, you cannot claim your speeding fines or your parking fines. Those ones are on you guys. But those other genuine, legitimate running costs of your vehicle in order to get to and from, or generally to participants. Participant travel. So, sorry, transport.
I was going to
See,
pull
I've done
you
it
up.
already. How did I do that? Participant transport. Participant transport is where you as a participant, so participant hat on for a moment. So you as a participant are going somewhere, and there's a couple of differences here. So the first one is if you are doing an NDIS funded activity, so you're with a support worker or you are attending a group or something similar, and that provider is providing transport for you, then they can bill not just for the time that the worker or the service is with you as you're going somewhere, but also for those non-labor costs. So that kilometres back in. So parking fees, nearly said fines, parking fees, road tolls, etc. The other one that kind of threw a little bit of a spanner in the works or a little bit of confusion mid-COVID where nobody needed more confusion, was you may remember that the NDIA went through, and for those participants who didn't have a consumables budget, there was a need to, but had core. What they did is they, on one weekend, went through and basically gave everybody a consumables budget so that they could purchase a device, usually iPad, tablet, etc., for telehealth or teleservice, teletherapy, whatever we're calling it now, services. So in doing so, though, the what happened at the back end is that actually every participant who had any core budgets then got all core budgets, which meant that a whole range of people then got a transport budget for the first time. So there's item codes specifically for that transport budget, and that's for things where it's not an NDIS funded activity. You are going to visit Aunt Martha, provided you're not in a COVID zone, and you can claim some of those costs of maybe your Uber or your taxi or your public transport fees. For those participants who already had a transport budget that was kind of that special way of self-managing, where it was paid in a fortnightly instalment, there's been no real change there. But for those who didn't have that, you're now most likely to have a transport budget, which you can use flexibly. So you can decide how much is or isn't allocated to it. So, one thing to be thankful to COVID for is the introduction of everybody having a transport budget.
Fantastic. And for those who have their transport budget, or previously had one, I should say, are they able to change the way it's managed so that it's not in that fortnightly instalment?
Yeah, because one of the challenges there, especially Mel, for participants whose the rest of their core budget is plan managed, for example, or agency managed. It's and I wouldn't be recommending this if your core is agency managed, but if it's plan managed and you have your transport budget being paid directly to you, the challenge there is that if you present your plan manager with a whole bunch of taxi receipts, they're not going to be able to assist you, because your transport budget for those type of non NDIS activity based things will actually be paid from the money that's being paid to you fortnightly, which means that flexibility of saying I need to allocate more money here rather than there is a little bit lost. So it's one of those spaces that if you do think that your transport costs are likely to be more than you generally get for your allocation, then it might be worth next review just requesting that you make that plan managed.
Fantastic. And we've just had an anonymous question come in, actually, but I'm going to throw it to you because it's all about transport here. And yes, I am getting that wording correctly. So is the pre-existing transport budget for travel to non-NDIA funded activities? Is our question there. So
that's exactly right. So in core, there are 4 budgets. So we number them rather than use their names most of the time. So we say 01, assistance with daily life, 02, transport, 03, consumables, 04, social and community participation, which I know has changed. Very exciting. So yes, that 02 budget, that transport allowance, that transport budget is for you do not have to be doing an NDIS funded activity. If you are wanting to have a provider charge you a transport fee, and it's because you are going to or participating in an NDIS funded activity, then that will come from the other budgets. That actually comes from usually the 04 social and economic and community participation.
Fantastic correction there, and thank you so much for the clarity. I think that's really important, and it was a great question to whomever asked that anonymously in the Q&A box, so thank you so much for that. Elisa, in the interest of time, I think we might move along to our lovely next topic here, because we could talk about travel all day long.
Transport. Transport,
travel, whichever one I mean. Tongue twisted every week.
I like, Mel, that every time you find a great looking car,
I do go searching. I like
different cars
finding fun cars.
It's pretty cool.
Alrighty. Supported independent living, or SIL, as it is commonly referred to in the NDIS space amongst providers and participants alike, there's been some changes, Elisa. And sorry for the tongue twist there on your name. The pricing restructure, what's happened there?
Okay, so basically what's happened here, SIL is, for those who are not familiar with it, it's as it says, supported independent living. So it's not the cost of the building that people live in, it's the cost of the support to live independently. And historically, it's been a bit of an area where it's been a bit of a process to get it put in place. And so involved a lot of quoting and working out what that support costs and how it's, getting quotes from different providers, etc., and then having them submitted, and then lots of time involved and workload, mainly, at the preparation end, and also at the agency end. And so what's happened is over time that's become more consistent, and it's become obvious that actually a lot of those quotes are starting to come in around the same benchmark prices, etc. And so the change here is that you no longer have to get all of those quotes and submit them, but instead you could ask your potential SIL provider to submit a roster of care. So one of the challenges before was often participants and families didn't really know what level of care was being provided. So how many hours a day, is there a sleepover, what's happening as part of that quote. But this will make it a lot easier. So you'll be able to see a roster of care, which is then priced out based on those standard prices out of the O1 assistance with daily life pricing.
Fantastic. So that probably is that biggest shift there, is that we're now seeing it under the O1 assistance with daily living pricing rather than in its own kind of separate category, if you like. Really good clarity there. And
it still is its own sort of space, but it's using that pricing to build your roster of care.
Fantastic. So see, that's great clarity because we're all learning here together. So I could read that price guide all day long and I'd still have questions. All right, now I believe you've got lots to tell us about group supports, Elisa. Employment supports. I'm skipping ahead in my head. We'll come to groups in just a moment. I know there's been a few questions, but employment supports, we've seen a big shift. They're now in core. So as you corrected, we've got a new budget name, or as we should say, a amended or adjusted budget name. So we're now seeing social, economic, and community participation. And the key word that was added there was economic. So do you want to tell us a little bit about the impact of that, I suppose, Elisa?
Yeah, and look, I think, when we look back to kind of the thoughts and the goals behind the creation of the NDIS, it's always been very clear that it's about individuals with disability being able to participate fully in our society and in community, and not, and being able to be contributors. That whole mindset of changing to a consumer rather than previous block funding type models. But also there's been a clear focus on being able to participate economically. And that part of that is that change to being a consumer, but it's also that change to participating within the economy as a worker or as a business owner or whatever it is you'd like to do, which I think is fantastic. So I think to have that support clearly labelled, that you can now use those core supports to help you in terms of on-the-job training, to help you with being able to perform some of the tasks at work that may be difficult, is really good, because it's always been a bit of certainly our experience has been a lot of mixed information coming through from that the participants have heard or understood from LACs. It might not have been how it was delivered was mixed, but certainly the understanding was not quite there around, can I use supports at work? Can I use supports to get to work? Well, now the answer is yes, you can. And that's covered out of your core budget, which is fantastic.
Lovely. And I have a question which I didn't put on our notes, so I'm going to throw it to you anyway. We've seen other programs, originally they were called TTW or Transition to Work programs. We then saw a shift to SLES or School Leaver Employment Supports. Is that budget still separate to these additions in core?
Look, it's still a pretty complex space, and there are still a lot of different departments involved outside of the NDIS who also provide employment support type programs and activities. So I think what we're seeing is is the start of a shift. As to how far that will go and how much will move from some departments to other departments, it's yet to be seen. Finding and keeping a job is still a budget, still there. So, there's no loss of budget, if you like. But the difference here is that there's clarity around that actually getting support to get to work, if that's what you need, is completely okay. So it's more about using those kind of everyday life supports, which is what CORE is all about, but in a job-related way.
Fantastic. And I think that's been a confusing space for quite a lot of us in the community for quite some time as to can I, can't I? It's probably one of the most popular questions online of can I, for instance, have support to get to work, or can I have a support worker with me at work for, as you mentioned, Elisa, those tasks that I might not be able to do on my own. For whatever reason. And this clarity is really big for a lot of us in the community. And it's going to make a big difference for economic participation for a lot of people with disability and also for their families, seeing that independence grow. So it's going to be huge to watch this space. And as we've mentioned here on the slides, we're expecting to see some transitions from other programs, but it's kind of a watch this space at the moment as to what exactly will happen.
That's right. And there are a few hints and tips around the types of activities that you could use the 04 social and economic community participation, wow, that's getting a mouthful, budget for. And so, it can be supervision at work where there are behavior, you might need support around behavioral issues, or coaching at work around on-the-job training and things like that. It also mentions that, whether that's a regulated type workplace or whether it's mainstream workplace or your own family business. So I'm really excited because I think that means that we might start to see a lot more innovation coming through, and especially around micro enterprises, for people getting started. You might not be able to find a job with somebody else, but you might, if you've got a great business idea but you need some physical or other supports in place to help you again bridge that gap, then I'm excited. Watch this space. I think we should do a session, Mel, on looking at great innovative business ideas that are coming through our disability community.
I think that would be fantastic, and I will make sure that that happens on our roster of these awesome webinars. Now, Elisa, we've just got one question here, just for clarity. So, Talia, thank you so much for popping this into our Q&A box. So, Talia has mentioned that she thought that you could use the supports for assistance with employment, so kind of like what we've discussed, prior to this price guide. Is the inclusion of economic in this budget name change, is that just to make it clearer that you now can and we've kind of got that green light to go ahead?
Look, I think it probably is. And Talia, you're absolutely right. For anybody thinking innovatively, you would already have been doing a lot of these things or using a lot of these supports. Where it's tricky is there are a lot of, and the NDIA will acknowledge this, that sometimes getting information out to each LAC, to each early years provider, to each person on the 1-800 number and getting a consistent answer is tough, right? It's a tough gig. So the more clarity that we can see around some of these naming things, the less fight it is for some of those things that should absolutely be there and be obvious.
Fantastic. And Talia, thank you for the clarity. She's just mentioned it's to support towards goals, and definitely I think
exactly right.
We're looking at.
Yeah. That's right.
Fantastic. All right. Now, where I jumped ahead earlier, I'd love to talk to you about group supports. So there's been quite a few changes in this space. I know last year we had a bit of a false start with some of these changes coming in, going out, coming in again. So do you want to give us an update on what's going on in the group support space?
Yeah, so the NDIS launched without any prior warning. As far as I'm aware, we certainly hadn't heard about it or seen anything coming through to give any preparation for it. But basically, the version of the price guide that came out on the 24th took out all of the ratios. So in other words, if you looked through, for example, if you looked through that 04 social, economic and community participation budget, previously in last year's price guide, you would have seen a whole bunch of items in there. So if, weekday support 1 to 1 is this price, weekday support 1 to 2, etc., 1 to 3, 1 to 5, that type of thing. So ratio. And what happened in the old price guide is that, let's say the price for support work for 1 to 1, weekday, $52.85, right? Then the price for 1 to 2 was obviously a lower price, but it wasn't half of $52. It's, off the top of my head, $30 something. Can't remember exactly what it was, but the end result was that if you were a provider and you were providing support to 2 people at the same time, your billing for that hour would be higher than the 1-to-1 ratio. And so for groups, that allowed a lot of groups to operate and to just be able to do some extra things and operate better and economically. What happened in the price guide released on the 24th of last month, just a week ago, was that all of those ratios were gone, and there was very clear instruction to take the hourly rate and divide it by the ratio required. So that meant for a lot of organisations running groups a really significant, in some cases up to 30% decrease in billing for their group activities, which doesn't really inspire people to run group activities. There's huge benefit in group activities, as I'm sure many people have experienced and know. It's great to do things on your own, 1-to-1. There's a place for that, but there's also a really solid place for doing things together with others. And so the fact that it was a week out with no preparation or prior warning, and a major change for many, many, many providers and businesses to make to their business model was pretty much, to be honest, quite ridiculous. So the NDIS has recognised that and walked it back. What they've done is put basically a 12-month delay. So for now, if you'd like to, you can continue to operate under the old regime of those ratios, and a lot of those ratios are popped back in, or you can move to new half price or third price or quarter price type ratios, but be able to, in addition, for some of those supports where you couldn't previously, in addition, charge for face-to-face, or sorry, non-face-to-face. I hope we're charging for face-to-face, otherwise nobody's doing anything. Non-face-to-face, and what's the other one? Centre capital costs.
Okay. We've had a lot of questions coming up and quite a few in the chat box at the moment flying. So thank you to the team who are answering these back and forth at the minute. So just for clarity there, you mentioned that we can either go with the new ratios or we can go with the old model. Is that for the next 12 months?
12 months only. Each provider has to just be consistent. So if you are going to change to the new approach, then, and you change, you're not allowed to change back according to the guide. And if you are going to stay with the old approach, you need to fully stay with the old approach as a provider. So it's not per provider to that person or group, that's your provider stance. Look, we expect most people will continue business as usual while they work out how to make, how and if to make other elements work. Look, it also gives an opportunity for the provider community to give feedback to the agency. It's 12 months. It doesn't mean it's inevitable just because it's written down on paper. We've seen lots of changes on things that have been written on paper before. So, be involved with your peak body. If you're a provider, be involved in giving feedback, put feedback up through the portal. All those things make a difference, and they, I'd like to say they get heard. I certainly know some things get heard. Some things feel like they don't quite get there yet. But yeah, together, that's how we end up with a scheme that everybody wants to live with. That in 20 years' time, it's like, of course, that's how it is.
Yeah, fantastic. And just because I know we've got a lot of support coordinators in the room live with us at the moment and a lot registered for our replay, there is a peak body for plan management and support coordination called Disability Intermediaries Australia, or DIA, as we like to call it. Elisa, do you have the web address for that?
I do, and you'll have to be good at spelling because it's intermediaries.org.au. So check out how to spell intermediaries, and you can get to intermediaries.org.au.
Fantastic. And I might pop a link on the replay page for everyone
Yes.
if you are looking for that peak body. And there are plenty of them out there for other supports and services as well. So Google will be
And
your friend.
in fairness and openness, I am one of the founding board members of DIA.
Definitely. And we're glad to have you on that board. I think it's fantastic to see Plan Tracker a part of that community as well, and really advocating for being a voice and seeing change come about. Alrighty. So that brings us to the end of what we've prepared. But I've got some questions here that I've been jotting down as we've gone along, and I think they're important just while we've got a couple of minutes here at the end.
Do I get
So
licorice all sorts if I answer these extra ones?
I may give you a packet just to be nice.
All right, we'll see how we go.
But I'm going to hide them, so you'll have to find them first.
That's no good.
Alrighty, so we had a question from Joanne earlier, and Joanne, thank you so much for answering, for popping this question in there. I know that one of our team has answered this for you, but I think it's important for everyone. So Joanne's question was around, can I pay above price guide rates for, say, my support worker? So Elisa, I thought we might quickly talk about who can pay above price guide rates and who cannot, and how your funding is managed and how that impacts it.
Excellent. So yeah, Joanne, was it?
Yes, it is.
Yep. So Joanne, it does depend on how your core support budget is managed. If your supports are agency or plan managed, then you need to stick to the NDIS price guide maximum rates. If you are self-managed, you are not required to stick to the rates, and you can negotiate whichever price you would like.
Fantastic.
Very simple answer.
That's a nice simple answer. I do love that. Another thing I wanted to touch on here, because I heard you mention it earlier and then I realized, oh my God, I left that off the slides. So cancellations. We've seen a shift. Whilst we were in COVID mode, as we like to call it, cancellations were 10 business days for a participant cancelling with their provider. What's it now? It's July 1st. Are we back to the old?
We're back to business as usual, which is 2 business days cancellation. And remember, that's for the participant cancelling the provider, not the other way around. And again, as always, communication between providers and participants makes life a whole lot easier for everybody. So if you are a participant and you're signing up with a new provider or starting to use their service, just check in and make sure you're familiar with what their policies are and the best way, if you are likely to need to cancel, on how to do that.
Fantastic. Thank you for that clarity. And just to add on that, if the participant cancels with the provider within that 2-day period, as it now applies from July 1st, you can still be charged. Is it up to 100% still, Elisa, or are we back to 90?
No, thankfully it is 100%. And that's the only reason I say thankful, that makes it sound terrible, is because from a business point, from a using the portal point of view, the portal did all sorts of strange things with invoicing that I am not going to bore you with. But just to know that from a practical point of view, it's a lot easier when it's a straight figure at 100%.
Fantastic. Alrighty, I'm just going to pull our slides down there. I know we've got lots and lots of questions coming in still, and to everyone, if we have answered, or I'm sorry if we haven't yet answered, we will come back to you. And we would love to invite you to join us next Tuesday, the 7th of July at 2 p.m. You can join us live, or if you register, you'll also receive a replay. We've had that question as well, so we do record these sessions for you. You will get a replay recording with captions. So if you're watching it on the train, for instance, and you don't have headphones, you can still watch along, and you'll have the captions at the bottom there. So we do include a replay recording and all of our resources. But Elisa, I think we've covered a lot for today. So I think we might wrap it up there. And I just want to say a huge thank you on behalf of the Plan Tracker team, and also on behalf of the community, for taking the time to read, and what I'm sure has been many rereads of the NDIS price guide and support catalogue, to present all of this wonderful information here today. Is there anything you'd like to leave us with?
Look, we're a few years in, 3.5 years, I think, are we? No, a little bit longer now, 4.5, 4. Gosh, you'd think I'd be good at maths, right? Sorry. Under-caffeinated for sure. We're 4 years in pretty much to the day for rollout starting officially, other than our trial sites, of course. And, there's still a few bumps along the way. There's still a lot of work we as a community, whether you are a participant, a family member, or a provider, or both, there's still a lot of work that we as a community need to do to make sure that we all end up with an NDIS that just serves our loved ones and serves our community for generations to come. So, these things, like, they're kind of a bit nerdy and a bit detailed, but they really matter, and they really do make a difference to people's lives, that we as a community get them right. So, if you've got concerns about anything that you're seeing on the price guide, or you've got great ideas, do send them through to the NDIA, do send them through to your peak body, do talk about them with planners, because, just because it's that way right now doesn't mean it has to always be that way. But we do have, I feel like we've got a bit of a window of time while it's still a little bit not quite set in stone. So yeah, my encouragement to everybody, take your passion, take your ideas, and just, go forward with them.
I absolutely love that, and we always encourage innovation. As we mentioned just before, we're doing a webinar session next Tuesday, the 7th of July at 2 p.m. You can join Elisa and myself for an NDIS Cup of Questions. And Elisa, I'm sure we'll be talking a lot more about the price guide and support catalogue and all the changes.
We answer lots of questions. It's really answering everybody's questions. So if your question didn't get answered today, or you'd like some more detail, we'll do our best to answer them. We might not know all the answers, but if not, we can always go on and help ask some other people who might know more than us, and come up with some answers.
Fantastic. All right. And as always, if you are looking for an NDIS plan manager or a self-management app, feel free to reach out to the team at Plan Tracker. We'd love to help you. You can call our team on 1-800-549-670 or email hello@plantracker.com.au. Elisa, thank you once again. We've loved having you all here with us today for this live session, or if you're watching the replay. And until next time, we hope you all have a fantastic week, and we'll see you on another webinar session sometime soon. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys.